Yes, I was going to ask what you thought made, the tie that binds so strong for you guys. And it just seems like you guys were just on the same wavelength.
We were in. We had similar senses of humor. We enjoyed the same kind of performance, aggressive outside. We were colored outside the lines. It was like we were aggressive. Playing wise, that was all there. It was very much a live at Leeds type of thing for me. I was so impressed with that record that, I knew that I wanted to take that and incorporate it into my style. And John used to say, if Pete ran The Who, it would have been a jazz band. If Roger ran it, it would have been a country western band. And if Keith ran it, believe it or not, it would have been a California surf band. And John was, he was into Dwayne. Yeah, he was into Dwayne Eddy and that whole twangy sound. And he really wanted to be improv, let's just be bombastic. So that's when I guess I fit into that mold for him as a player. He realized I can do this. And even though he was the first guy in The Who to go solo, I don't think he necessarily wanted to be a solo musician in the tradition of like Pete Townsend, because it was Pete Townsend's band and that was it. I think John always wanted to be in a band, in a little family, in a little gang, in a little group. And when we finally started playing together in '87, he realized that this could be the makings of that, and that's what turned into the John Entwistle Band. And we just hit it off on every level. Senses of humor, his humor very dark, very oblique, and I guess mine similar. And we were making each other laugh. We were enjoying ourselves. We liked the same kind of music. And we just, it's when you meet somebody, especially later in your life, 87, I was probably in my 30s by that time. You kind of know who you want to hang out with, and you make new friends. And John was 8 years older than me, and it just worked. It wasn't. There was no strain in it. We just clicked. It didn't matter that he was the bass player in The Who and I was the drummer in Rat Race Choir. It only mattered that we were two guys that got along musically, mentally, spiritually, and that began the journey.
So how quickly after you met John did you start working with him more regularly?
Well, very interesting. After NAMM happened in June of '87, I guess it was August, maybe July or August, I got a call from the rep from Kramer. She said, would you guys like to do the K-Rock and Roll Up Your Sleeve blood drive at the Bottom Line in New York for the holidays, talking about Christmas holidays? Mm-hmm. And I said, absolutely, we would love to do that. And of course, I had to call John and hope that he was going to be into it, which he was, because he just wanted to play. The whole thing was he just wanted to play. And they, once again, rolled out the red carpet. They gave us everything that we needed to do it. Everything was first class for John. And the idea was we were going to play this live, and it's on YouTube somewhere. This live broadcast from the Bottom Line on K-Rock, New York K-Rock. It was 95, I don't remember the call letters. I think it was 96 K-Rock. Anyway, so we're going to do this blood drive, right? And I said, you know what? I think we could use a couple of warm-up dates. We went down to Dennis Berardi's ranch in South Jersey, this amazing estate. He was one of the owners of Kramer Guitars, and we rehearsed there for 4 or 5 days. And then I had worked it out that we would go and play. Do you remember the Chance in Poughkeepsie by any chance?
What's funny is when you were rattling off names earlier, I was going to mention the Chance, because there was a Chance in Poughkeepsie. There was Joyous Lake in Woodstock.
We played Joyous Lake. The Entwistle Band played Joyous Lake. In fact, I honestly think my father caught you guys there, my stepfather, because he was a huge John Entwistle fan. Huge. Oh, well, and you know who else was there that night? Rick Danko, because he was living in Woodstock at the time. But I called up the owner of the Chance and said, it's Steve from Rat Race Choir and John Entwistle, blah, blah, blah. We'd love to play a couple of warm-up dates. I think the bottom line date was on a Sunday, so we played a Friday and Saturday at the Chance, and they booked it like that and gave us as much money as I wanted. And so I said to John, you want to play some more dates besides this? I mean, you're going to be here. You might as well, right? So he said, yeah, go ahead. And I booked, with my agent, and I booked, 20 gigs maybe. We played all over the place. And it was Rat Race Choir. And then our bass player, who was the singer, would give up the bass. John would come out, plug in. Our bass player would be the singer. And we did a set of Who/John material. We did that in November, December of '87. And the following year, John asked me if I would, because I had coordinated this whole thing. So now all of a sudden there's trust, because every one of the things that he needed or required were met without question. So he said, well, I have a band, which at the time had Zach Starkey and a couple of West Coast guys, and I think one of the Tim Gorman, who was keyboard player for the Who. And he said, it's called The Rock. We have an album, but I'm not getting any traction with it. So I said, well, let me book a tour. Let's partner up business wise, and I'll put together a tour. I know all the agents I need to know, and we'll do that. And so we did that. And so I essentially joined his band, which became our band. And we did an international tour in 1988. And then I'm sure you remember that in '89, miraculously, the Who said, well, we better go do a tour. And they did. And, that's the way it sort of started. So John went back, he was playing with the Who. We did a couple of one-off gigs over the years that followed. And then finally, and we stayed friends. I mean, we would talk almost every day, like high school kids on the phone. I would get these faxes in the middle of the night, like 1 o'clock in the morning, which is 6 o'clock in England. I'd be looking at my fax machine, and this would come up in my fax machine. And, and it was like, that was his way of seeing if I was up. So I'd call him back, and we'd rattle and tell jokes. And you have to realize, when you're John Entwistle, it's not like you can just go hang out someplace. You're John Entwistle. There's a certain mystique that has to be maintained. But with me, he didn't have to do that. He didn't have to be John Entwistle. He could just be John, the bass guitarist. And that's how our friendship went. And then finally in the mid-'90s, he said, what do you think about putting a proper band together? And I said, I would love to do that. Because the whole scene for Rat Race it was obliterated. It just didn't exist. And I had been touring with Leslie West in his version of Mountain, which I loved. I mean, one of my getting ready for school songs was Never in My Life. So to open up with that song every night was like, wow. And I said, yeah, man, let's put a band together. And I suggested a bunch of guys. And he said, what, we had been jamming at the China Club. Anytime he came through New York, we went downtown and jammed in New York at the China Club. And he said, well, what about that guy that we played with at the China Club that knew all this stuff? I said, oh, yeah. And that was it. And so again, we partnered up. We hired a crew. I got some buses and a truck and the gear. And we went out on the road for that summer of '96, I think it was. And then it became a regular thing. Whenever we could go out, we would go out. And he loved it. I mean, he loved being on the tour bus. He loved that whole life. Don't forget when you're in the Who, or you're in the Beatles, or you're in the Stones, you're not just checking into an airport and getting on, it comes with a whole bunch of minutia. And whereas this was, not that it was any less attentive or organized, but it was a lot freer because you weren't dealing with 3 other guys that were all doing different interviews. It was just kind of me and John and the band. And in fact, when we started doing early interviews for the band before we went out and toured, during rehearsal, we did an interview and somebody said, well, what's the new band sound like? And John went, well, it's bass and drums and some other guys. I was like, okay, yeah, that's what it is. It's a bass solo that has words around it sometimes. And it was glorious, man. I mean, we just let it run, and we'd experiment with stuff, and we'd try this and we'd try that, and it was just an amazing opportunity to grow. And I had been in several good situations by that time. I had already done my stint in the studio with Richie Blackmore, and of course all the tours with Leslie, and I did sell several albums. But now it was another level. This was a whole new thing with John. It was like, man, come on. And we just ate it up. It was fantastic.